Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this UCFB Insight session. We're just going to give it a minute or so to wait for everyone else to join in, and then we will get going. Thanks again. Okay, let's make a start then, guys. So, again, welcome to the latest session in this UCFB Insight series, where today we will discuss the effect of the coronavirus pandemic in English football. We will focus on how clubs might adapt to a post-pandemic world. I'm delighted to be joined today by three of my colleagues from UCFB, in no particular order. Going to some hands up, guys, as I go through. Hazel Venables, a chartered accountant who has held CFO and finance director level roles both in the UK and internationally. Hazel also has significant experience in the corporate recovery sector, helping businesses to avoid receivership and insolvency proceedings. An experienced teacher at university, professional, and executive education levels, Hazel is now a finance lecturer at UCFB Wembley. Shana Doyle-Axel has been involved in corporate marketing in the real estate, motor and events industries, with research interests lying in digital marketing, marketing to Generation Z, and sports sponsorship, having conducted research on major sponsorship deals in South African provincial rugby. Previously a head of programme for South Africa's leading private higher education institution, with over 10 years teaching experience, Shana lectures in marketing at UCFB Wembley. And Ian Tomlinson, who with over 20 years experience working in education and training, also works as a special projects consultant within the financial and commercial departments at League Two club Bradford City. Ian's extensive background of financial management and strategy has seen work across multiple sectors, including sports. Having previously published research on the financial heritage of cricket and its commercialisation, Ian is programme leader for the Football Business and Finance undergraduate programme at UCFB Etihad. Thanks for coming on, guys. Welcome. And finally, my name is Christopher Winn. I'm also a chartered accountant and hold an MBA specialising in the football industry. I'm my program leader for the MSc Football Business Programme across all settings here at UCFB. So thank you everyone for joining us today on YouTube as well if you are watching at a later date. I want to kick things off with a financial summary of what we know so far. Starting at the top of the ladder in the Premier League, the lack of matchday revenue across these final stages in the 1920 season may amount to around £150 million of lost revenue for Premier League teams, with the Premier League Big Six potentially footing around 100 million of this given their crowds and potential remaining number of home games across all competitions. It's also been openly reported there could still be a rebate of between 300 and 350 million pounds due to the changing timing and nature of the product. And should commercial partners, if the agreements with those per se, if they've been breached due to prolonged lack of exposure for them during the pandemic and the lockdown period, even a 10% fall in commercial revenues could amount to a further 140 million loss based on 18-19 figures. In total, this circa 600 million pound of lost revenue could obviously rise further depending on if behind closed doors games are extended into next season. Going down the ladder a little bit in terms of that pyramid in English Football League, it's been widely reported that clubs face an estimated 200 million hole in their collective revenues come September. These being leagues which rely much more heavily on foregone matchday revenues compared to their Premier League counterparts, who are obviously much more heavily boosted by that large and lucrative broadcast agreement in place at that level. A quick review of the 18-19 financials across both the Premier League and the Championship shows a quite startling financial picture, even pre-pandemic, with the Premier League generating its worst pre-tax loss position collectively since 2012-13, that being before the advent of financial regulation, and Championship clubs recording a collective wage to revenue ratio in excess of 100% for the third time in the last 4 seasons. Coupled with the fact that matchday revenues are the most frequent source of cash inflows, it's easy to see why many are concerned for the futures of their teams, especially in the EFL, despite the various advances and schemes that we've seen utilised in the last few months or so. As such, with all that in mind, I thought it best to maybe start with yourself, Hazel. Given your experience and with many EFL clubs' cash inflows being significantly impacted since March, is there an increased risk of clubs going out of business? And if so, what do you see as the key warning signs?
Well, I think with any business at the moment, there's an increased risk, but particularly within football business, mainly because they have a lot of clubs have accumulated losses already. For me, the issue is cash. People don't go out of business because they've just made a loss. They go out of business because they've run out of cash. Now, a lot of these clubs are sort of, in some ways, have been running on empty, reliant on loans, soft loans, often from directors, the continual injection of capital to keep it going. There are many clubs who really, when you look in isolation at the balance sheet, are technically insolvent. So we've now got an event that's happened that no one foresaw coming. No one saw a pandemic coming. That hasn't been planned into anybody's financial scenario. So I think it's only a matter of time before we're going to see a very stressed financial situation within all the leagues. There are some clubs right at the top of the Premier League that are secure enough to survive just about anything, but they are a tiny, tiny minority. And even then, if the pandemic is prolonged, it's going to severely damage their financial security in an ongoing manner. The warning signs I'd be looking for is an increasing reliance on overdraft, debtors taking a long time to collect, and football has strange debtors in the sense that they're often contractual, and they're expecting payments at certain dates. And I think we're looking at a situation, because this is global, so it's not just football clubs here. If they're owed money from a club in France or Spain, they're going to be struggling as well to fulfill those contractual requirements. So it's not like your debtors are due in 30 days, as with many sort of businesses. They could be 60, 90, 120, they could be 6 months down the road, but they're big chunks of money. And if for some reason that big chunk doesn't come in, there is a problem. The other thing I'd be looking at is if we were looking at their trade creditors, the trade payables, they will be increasing, mainly because the football club doesn't have any cash to pay them. And again, those could be quite chunky bits of money because they're for transfer fees, maybe paying for players on loans. So those are the warning signs. And it's really cash that's critical at the moment. Have they got enough cash, and do they have enough cash to come in to meet their financial obligations as they fall due? And I think that is a huge issue for the industry. It's going to be cash strapped. And that's the big warning sign, because that's what makes people go out of business.
Absolutely, Hazel, completely agree there. The notion of that importance of cash has never been so more important, and has clearly signalled during the course of this pandemic and lockdown period just how much clubs rely on those forecast certainty of cash flows. Now, with that match day and associated cash inflow so important to clubs in the EFL, maintaining those relationships, even looking for notions of alternative related revenue streams, they could be crucial to long-term survival so as to try and boost those cash inflow situations. I guess turning to you, Shana, do you think the concept of fan engagement in that respect and how clubs work with their fans now and going forward, has that changed during lockdown? And if so, in what way?
Yeah, so I think it's actually a good opportunity for a lot of the football clubs now to appeal to their fans, because they know that their fans are at home looking for some sort of engagement with football. So I think it's actually an exciting time for the marketing departments for a lot of these football clubs, because they know that they have 100% of your attention. They know that people are really craving for sport to come back. And I think it's a really exciting time. And I think there's actually more pressure now on the content teams to deliver really sort of behind the scenes content that actually engages the fan, the football fan, who actually wants engagements sort of 7 days a week, 24 hours, 365 days of the year. It's not like the past where you would just go to the game, have a few beers with your mates, go home, and that's the end of it. We can see that the current football fan wants that constant content and that exciting and unique content coming out. And I think in actual fact, I'm very much, I believe that everything can actually be turned into an opportunity and not necessarily seen as a weakness. So I think this is a great opportunity for the football clubs to actually deliver behind the scenes content that is really engaging with the football fan.
And have you seen any kind of standout examples, I guess, of those kind of engagement strategies over the last few weeks and months?
Yeah, so going on from what Hazel said, I mean, Hazel really, really emphasized the importance of cash flow. And that's probably their biggest challenge at the moment, not having live games, not having spectators come to the games, especially your sort of League One and League Two clubs who are very, very much dependent on that cash flow. So there have been some amazing examples of sort of League One and League Two clubs in the EFL that have really been trying to bring in some sort of cash during this pandemic. So one example I can think of is Wycombe Wanderers. So a League One club, they decided to do something called the commemorative wall, where season ticket holders could actually buy a plaque and it could be put onto the commemorative wall and your name is then forever in the stadium. Really, really good example of that. Another one that I saw that I was really amazed at was Reading. So Reading Football Club, they've designed a new kit during the pandemic. And what they're actually doing is they're selling for £5. You can actually go and buy an NHS badge and actually have it put onto the new merchandise. And that money goes towards the NHS. So you're appealing to people's emotions. And I know as a marketer, that is probably your ultimate sort of aim, is to go for the heart of the football fan. And by saying that a percentage of it is going to go back to the NHS, you know that your fans are going to support you in getting some of that cash flow coming back in. Another final one that I actually see a lot of clubs are doing now, not just Premier League, but even overseas clubs are doing, is they're starting to actually get fans' pictures put into the stadium. So again, going back to Reading Football Club, they actually charged people £20 to actually have a cut-out cardboard picture of them and put into the stadium, so that when the players do play, they feel that there is some engagement, there are still fans around them. So just sort of 3 examples that really, really stood out to me. And Stevenage Football Club have been absolutely amazing. They've been featured on BBC recently about, again, going back, helping the local residents. They've even offered a mental health line that people that are isolated could call in. So once again, for me, the ultimate has been appealing to the heart and the emotions of the football fan.
Cheers, John. I know it's an absolute privilege to hear that there's so much good being done in the course of this pandemic in terms of engaging with fans beyond the realms of going to the game on a match day basis. Obviously something that many have been deprived of for a long time now, and as such clubs have had to look for those alternative strategies. Now, in terms of managing change, I guess this is where I'd like to bring Ian into the conversation, definitely. Given your work at League Two level, generally speaking, obviously no specifics required here, have you seen a marked change in how clubs at that level of the EFL and those lower tiers where match day revenue has been so important to them, and obviously its lack of hurting so much entirely? Have you seen the change in how they're operating from a kind of change management viewpoint, how they're adapting strategically at this moment in time?
Yeah, I think before I come up with the answer, I think I need to, looking at League Two, put out a congratulations to the Cobblers, Northampton Town, last night getting the promotion. So well done, Keith Curl et al. For that promotion. And also, it would be amiss of me, coming from Bradford, not to mention the Derby Wisdom's player, who at the moment is going through a recovery, having had the attack. So I wanted to get that out there, because in all these times, we can get bogged down in strategy and things. But congratulations to Northampton Town, and also Mr. Wisdom, who's actually going through recovery at the moment through that attack. So I think with strategy, we can always get bogged down in some ways. And the thing that I've noticed in League Two is the whole concern and frustration that's embedded in it. So I suppose if we're going to go to a strategy model, it would be the Cobbler Ross, the whole direction of where things are going and what's happening. So I'll come back to that in a moment. But the key thing with level 2 or League Two is the fact that people working in it are not always looking at it as their full-time job. They've got other business interests, other concerns, other personal financial worries that are happening. So there's been a whole feeling of this limbo, and not a, suppose, book to turn to or a handprint blueprint where they could say, this has happened, or this is a precedent that we could look at going forward. This is a direction we could follow. So taking a good old strategy approach and thinking of it in this sort of car analogy, all of a sudden this vehicle that we're in is hurtling down the road. We've always been used to this. And all of a sudden there's a dead end. So it's in that dead end sort of feel. It's like, this has come from nowhere. Where's the diversion signs that we can follow? What's happening? What's actually happening? So in League Two, what we've seen from a strategic point of view is a whole fixation on the news. What's actually happening, all the news that's coming out, what information can we get hold of? And also a fixation on the KPIs. So we've mentioned cash flow. It always feels in League Two, League One, and the lower levels, a real fixation on cash. Cash, we know, is so important, as Hazel's quite rightly put out there, but it's become, in some ways, such a big problem that we can't see past that. And it's become quite difficult in terms of seeing how do we get through this fixation, this understanding that we need to get the cash coming in, and yet many things that we would normally do just can't happen. So as Shanna said, what League Two clubs have done is looked at other options, other engagement opportunities, other things that we can look at. So I suppose in many ways, they've become much more proactive than they've ever been before. So what is actual possible? What can we do to actually make things at least feel as though, for the fans and the other stakeholders, that things are moving forward? So as I mentioned before, the Kubler-Ross model, I suppose we did go through the sort of denial, the shock. Is this really happening? How long is it going to last? Wanting to get through the other end as quick as possible. And then we've managed to get to the acceptance level. And now we're looking at the whole commitment and the change of the club, so that we can actually look for once at what direction are we going, and how are we going to move that direction and take all the stakeholders with us in what will inevitably be a new direction, a new vision, new mission, new everything. So all of a sudden, everything's being thrown up in the air. And I think specifically for League One, League Two, a chance not to be constantly firefighting, but a chance to just take a step back and look at it from a bird's eye view in terms of where are we now? Where do we actually want to get to? And instead of it being a day-to-day, that whole way of just looking from a slight afar position with people on furlough and having some time to just sit and think, really, which has never really been possible in League Two, League One football before.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, Ian, I couldn't agree more in terms of it. We speak a lot about the new normal, don't we? And if we do have to adapt to this new normal going forward, a football club is a business, especially at League One, League Two level. As we say, those cash inflows are so important in terms of what's being missed right now. And bringing along all those stakeholders and communicating with them appropriately is the only way that they're going to adapt to that new normal and go forward into the future successfully, hopefully, where that is indeed possible. Now,
communication is so important for all these things. We've looked at marketing, we've looked at cash flow. Unless it's being communicated where your cash is at any precise moment, or you're looking at marketing in terms of what communication are we putting out there for the stakeholders to know that these things are happening. Communication is only as good as how it's been delivered and how it's been received. So it's really important that we use the right channels. And I suppose the other thing that's been interested in League One, League Two is the fact that they've had to look at those communication channels. And in many ways, communication is so key that they've taken the idea has always been technology, but there's been a focus recently on VAR, and all of a sudden the whole vision of that has been switched to off the pitch and what technology have we got available to help this business go forward, and putting some money in place to make sure that communication can happen from a technological point of view that's never really happened in League Two before.
Definitely. Thank you for the input in. And before, I guess it's worth saying, guys, for everyone watching, before I go any further, if you do have any questions that you want to ask the panel, we can't answer them all, obviously, but we'll do our best. If you can use the live chat box on YouTube, they'll filter through to us here and we'll try and get some of those answered. Now, before I kind of probably head back to Hazel again for a bit more insight on kind of managing the financial side of things going forward, I have had one question in which I think is very topical and relevant, which I'm very happy to answer myself, from Peter Dawson. I do know Peter Dawson, so if it is the one I know, lovely to see you here. If not, thank you for the question anyway. Does the panel think the current financial difficulties will accelerate the move to more financial constraints such as salary caps? Personally speaking, yes, absolutely. Particularly in the EFL Championship, for instance. It's long been known that the financial regulations existing in the Championship, there's been the profitability and sustainability rules, do not regulate wage expenditure. That's why we see such high levels of wage to revenue ratios, such huge losses being generated, and the lengths that we see some clubs go to circumvent those rules, such as the sale and leaseback of stadia, which a few clubs have put through their accounts in the last couple of years to get around the rules to the best extent they can. As such, yes, I definitely believe the notion of a salary cap it was important pre-pandemic, but even now we've got the case where revenues have been reduced, cash flows have been reduced, but there's ongoing wage costs, exceptionally high wage costs, especially in the Championship relative to revenues continue. It does make the decision, the call, the notion of a salary cap all the more crucial if clubs are to operate sustainably going forward. This could be that reset moment, albeit in the most horrific of circumstances, that we've been looking for in terms of making clubs operate as sustainable businesses at those levels and not pile the cash in terms of trying to win promotion to the promised land of the Premier League. Now, just as I said, going back to Hazel, we talked obviously about the importance of cash at the moment and how in its lack thereof, you could possibly say that there are some business continuity issues. Yes. Now, you obviously held some quite high-profile positions in the financial world over the course of your career. If you were running a club here in England right now on the financial side of things, say a CFL-FD level role, what would your key priorities and concerns from a business continuity perspective be for the forthcoming 12 months?
Well, if you're running a company and you're a director, you actually have a statutory duty to ensure your business is an ongoing concern. And so you need to be opening a toolbox that you probably don't use when things are running normally. And so if I was going in and advising, I call it the five C's. So the first thing I'd be saying is you must know day to day exactly your cash flow and the timings of them. That's important because that will highlight to you if you've any gaps coming up, and it can give you time to plug those gaps, either by talking to a bank or going and seeking temporary capital from the owners and directors and other shareholders. So cash flow is important, and knowing that inside out and updating it all the time as you get more information. The second thing is looking at capital. Can you get capital into the business? That could be in a short-term basis, so a loan for 12 to 18 months. Again, in football, it's common to get those loans from directors and shareholders. It could be an opportunity of way in actually engaging with your fans by perhaps doing some crowdfunding, and that may be very suitable for people in clubs in Division 1, Division 2. Norwich City have used crowdfunding in the past, and you can use the crowdfunding. They can subscribe to those funds, and they may get benefits in the future. It could be 10% off merchandise, or it could be priority for season tickets, or when eventually, hopefully, people can go back to the grounds, maybe getting discount on food. So you can raise capital from the fans, and that may be a nice way to engage as well and involve the fans within the business without necessarily impacting the capital structure of equity shareholders that exists already. So raising capital, very important. One of the issues with many football clubs is they have technically an insolvent balance sheet, as we know, because of all the accumulated losses. That can make getting funds from traditional funders very difficult. So you're going to have to be creative on raising capital. The other C is communication. So you need to be communicating with the people who owe you money. Can they pay it? If they can't pay the £1 million they owe you, then look at saying, okay, you're not going to make that payment. Could you pay us £100,000? And can we reschedule that? And same with the people you owe money to. The best way is to communicate and talk to them and say, look, I'm not going to be able to make that. I can make this amount of money on that date, and this is a schedule we think we can hold to. So communication is very, very important. I can't emphasize that enough. Why people panic and then may try and get a court order against you, a petition to wind you up, is because you're not communicating. If they think you're being open, honest, transparent, they would rather in the end collect the money than for you to go into insolvency, because if you're certainly an unsecured creditor, you're unlikely ever to see any money. So it's better giving people time if you think that's a realistic option. Credit management, as I say, less important in football because of the nature of your receivables. But if you are owed money, you need to be, making sure they can pay it and when they're going to pay it. And then finally, it's creativity. So now's the time to say, well, just because you've always done something one way doesn't mean you should carry on doing it that way. And that sort of ties into strategy. So what could you do differently? Little savings can go a long, long way. And you need to be looking at cost as well. So everything that you're spending, do you really, really need it? And is there a cheaper way to get that good or service? So there's lots of things you could be doing. And it's really looking day to day, but being very creative and looking really, going into strategy, how can I generate the cash coming in? Because the biggest cash flow for the moment, gate receipts, doesn't seem to be, that's not going to be an option as we know it. So you've got to looking at how you get people to subscribe to watch the games. I know for Reading, for instance, are charging their fans, I think, £10 to watch their game. So it's been very creative. You can get through this, but you really have to be hands-on every day with what's going on.
I find it quite interesting, I think, Hazel, those concepts of creativity and communication are kind of shining through this discussion so far from all of you in terms of the key facets clubs should be trying to adhere to going forward, as difficult as it may be. Now, an interesting idea, probably coming back to you, Shana, here, that I've heard to maybe try and help some of these lower league clubs generate much needed revenues in the short term could be, were they to communicate and ask for it, assistance from Premier League clubs or higher tier clubs in terms of kind of shared marketing knowledge and skills. Is this a feasible gap, do you think, in terms of short-term aid? And if so, how do you see such a notion possibly working practically?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel it is a feasible idea, and I think it's an idea that a lot of the Premier League clubs should seriously consider, because at the end of the day, the one thing we've noticed about this pandemic is that there's sort of that attribute coming through again and again is of kindness and of a sense of community. And that's what football is all about, is being there for each other. It's not about competition anymore. So I believe the Premier League team should adopt one of the League One or League Two clubs to help them through this period. Now, we need to remember that a lot of the staff, especially at, for example, like Ian was chatting about the League Two clubs, have been furloughed. And it's worrying times for a lot of these smaller, lower league clubs. So the idea that I know, Chris, you and I chatted about with the EFL a few weeks ago, the National League, is we chatted about, well, why not adopt a team? And the way I see this playing out is, for example, and I don't know if the rest of the panel here have seen that, for example, Harry Kane. So Harry Kane decided to give back to his schoolboy team, Leighton Orient. And what he did is he actually became the shirt sponsor for them. And I thought that was a brilliant example of a celebrity in the Premier League actually giving back to some of his schoolboy club to generate some revenue that they very much need right now, like Hazel was saying. Another sort of way I see it playing out is friendlies. And again, these friendlies will obviously attract fan bases from both clubs and get everyone wanting to actually help these clubs again. And then finally, the other way I see this playing out is actually shared resources. So for example, the marketing team that have been furloughed at some of these League One and League Two clubs actually joining in and teaming up with one of the Premier League marketing teams and actually sharing resources, sharing ideas, sharing experiences with each other. I think this is a time where we need to put differences aside and actually save the beautiful game.
Definitely, but very much a collaborative viewpoint, Shana. And I entirely agree. In these times, you'd hope that these clubs are looking out for each other. And going back to what Hazel said as well, when it comes to receivables and payables, where you communicate your issues in terms of what you've got to come in, what you've got going out. Can it be reorganised? Can we ask other clubs for assistance and help where possible, etc.? And entirely agree with those notions. Now, an interesting question we've had come in off YouTube from Alana Tomlinson regarding what are the primary and secondary impacts of not having ticketed viewers in the companies such as Amazon Prime, been very successful during this time, but are they taking advantage of football? Ian, is that one you'd like to comment on potentially from a kind of strategic perspective? Do you think companies such as Amazon Prime are taking advantage of football by not having ticketed viewers per se?
I think it's an interesting question. I think I know where that one's come from. But the thing that's interesting is the fact that it does open up a new playing field to many people and many companies. So it's not just the change in media outlets, but it's a change per se across all sorts of different platforms. So I think one of the things that's interesting is who's actually putting the hand up in these circumstances, who's willing to change quickly in these circumstances, and who's willing to take a lot of these threats into opportunities. So using the TOWS matrix or the SWOT matrix that people are aware of, how quickly can you take these weaknesses into strengths or the threats into opportunities? And I think that's the ones that are going to really rise to the surface in these circumstances. So we've seen challenges to traditional markets. So the question was referring to things like Amazon and the new outlets in terms of showing games, etc. But there's going to be big changes, and we haven't seen many of them already. I think there's a lot more to come. But I think the other thing that's going to be happening is this whole change. And you mentioned one of my first questions was around change. Is how quickly are people willing, or individuals right through to the major companies, willing to change and embrace these changes, and then see the new norm with them much more at the center of the norm. So people are getting excited, people are seeing new challenges, but I think you need obviously the cash and the ideas and everything to go forward with this. But it's very much the idea generation. I think what we're going to find is that we're going to come, or some companies are going to come to the forefront in terms of they are willing to take the challenges on, but they're also willing to take the risks on at the same time. Now, we've focused a lot in terms of the resource of finance, but we can very quickly forget other resources that are available to us. Community spirit, community input, the ideas factory, as it were, students getting more involved. We're going to have a situation, especially at UCFB, where there's going to be a lot of students with potentially more time. So once that's a student actually phoning in now, just saying, yes, we think this is a good idea. But I think one of the things is that it's going to be, once a challenge is put forward, who's willing to take that challenge on, I think is what I'm trying to say. So these new outlets, these new things that are ready to overtake the traditional players, it may be the game that they've been waiting for.
Thanks, Ian. No, I entirely agree with that viewpoint. And on the subject of TV revenue as well, generally up at the Premier League level again now, a question from Neil Silver coming in saying that 2 years ago, 13 or 14 Premier League clubs said they could play a season without letting in fans. And has that changed, thanks to TV money, that is, has that changed as a result of the pandemic? Well, from my own analysis, go back 2 years or so, Premier League teams are reporting their highest ever levels of collective pre-tax profits, mainly as a result of the late first year of the previous broadcast rights cycle, per se. And as such, we're in a very healthy position collectively, with very, very few, if any, making actual pre-tax losses. However, things are slightly different 2 years down the line. Clubs are spending a bit more compared to what they're used to from a sustainability angle. That wage to revenue ratio in the top flight has indeed now hit 60% again. It was under 60. And coupled with the fact that pre-tax losses were recorded collectively in the 18-19 season, around £175 million in total, and the fact that going forward, if that cost base hasn't changed in 19-20, and you've also got the fact that, as I said at the start, the revenues from TV broadcast is going to fall 300 to 350 as a result of that change in timing and nature of the product per se, given that it's now been behind closed doors over the summer rather than what they thought they were paying for with fans and earlier in the year. That probably means that clubs are going to make even bigger losses. And as such, could they play a season without letting in fans? Yes, probably still. But is it going to cause more financial damage now than it would have done 2 years ago? Definitely, yes. Again, it's going to be enhancing that loss-making picture. Now, on the subject of cash flow once more, because I appreciate we talked about communication, connectivity, asking for help, collaboration, but cash is also very much king here. And a kind of a joint question probably for Hazel and Ian, which I think probably summarises that cash flow perspective quite nicely. One of my own, that's been that much of the funds that have been made available to EFL clubs in terms of those amounts being paid by the EFL and the Premier League, totaling about 175 million in total between the two. They're very much made up of advanced payments, be it parachute payments, solidarity payments, EFL broadcast payments, as well as a small portion of loan advances as well. Because these are all advanced payments, and these amounts are usually forecast, obviously, when clubs are looking at their costs to be paid, whatever happens, not expecting a pandemic, there's every chance that clubs have already spent some of this money in advance anyway, and are also going to have the gap in income further down the line. Coupled with the fact that wage deferrals might mean that higher levels of wages are expected in the future, does that potentially mean that it could be a case of kicking the can down the line? Are we likely to maybe see some clubs getting into difficulty around September time, when higher costs might kick in, or the lack of the revenues that they got now rather than later on is felt, so to speak?
Oh, definitely. And also those clubs that have furloughed players. Obviously, the government's furlough scheme is coming to the end in the end of October. So they're going to be perhaps hit with a double whammy. Also, traditionally, obviously, there's no games normally in July and August. So August would be, or very few games, you would have a period where there wasn't going to be any cash coming in anyway during that period. Maybe some season tickets, I suppose, would come in. But we've got say where they've been seeking support, that's all been tailored off now. And I think that's going to be the critical time in September, October, where they're trying to get back and they're playing games. So they've got to pay the players, they've got to pay the groundsmen, going to have to bring some people back off furlough to ensure they can play those games. And that's going to incur costs. And, you know, it's really, I think that's going to be the critical time where we're going to see lots of money going out, but how they're going to make sure they're going to get the cash coming in. And if they spent it all already, the advance payments, then that's a real issue.
Yeah, go on. I was going to say to you, Ian, obviously you'll know probably a little more firsthand that the nature of some of these payments as well means that they're not evenly distributed. It's not like that pot of 175 million going to all clubs equally down to League Two. It's simply not. And it could well be the case that the much smaller amounts being received by League One, League Two teams such as Bradford, that you might be more familiar with, that might not even be enough to see them through this period, let alone any knock-on effect in September. Would that be fair?
Incredibly fair point. I think, was it Phil Neville that's just said on the back of other information from people that there could be up to 60 clubs in danger at the moment. It was a report that I saw the other day that said that there was potentially 60. It was coming on the back of Phil Hodgkinson. I've just seen it in front of me now. Phil Hodgkinson had actually said that there could be 50 or 60 clubs that are in danger. And Gavin Neville, his brother, was the person who said, this is obviously a nightmare in front of us. So I know Phil said things about it, but it was Gary Neville that actually commented on the back of that said, this 50 or 60 may not get to the 50 or 60, but it will be a heck of a lot of clubs that are actually impacted. Now, we've also seen on the 30th today, the end of a lot of players' contracts. So are we going to get to a situation where it's a complete new buyer's market, which could end up with a reduction in players' fees by default? And it's going to be the people who are creative potentially with contracts that actually then see a change in the size of clubs even, and the new journey for many of these clubs when they actually see opportunities, like I mentioned before, and are managing able to capture these opportunities. So it may even be international funds that are coming across that are seen as opportunities in a changing market. And that is where some of the changes are going to come from. Now,
I agree with you, Ian. I think now is the time. The model that most clubs have been running under we know is unsustainable. That's why we brought in financial fair play regulations. It's unsustainable, and there has to be a change for football to survive in the way that we enjoy it today. And the model is redundant. And so it's got to be sustainable, and it hasn't been. It's the only business really where these huge salaries are paid in proportion to the job done. I mean, I suppose the only other thing would be the movie industry, where you pay for a star around the film. But even then, they've managed that by saying you take a profit share. instead of paying these, multi-million pound salaries. It has to change, and I think now's a good time for everyone to sit back and say, actually, the chickens have come home to roost now. This is unsustainable. A lot of the business, football clubs are at risk, and I think they have to reinvent the model. And I think it's a good thing if wages are suppressed down and it becomes a buyer's market. I think that's going to be the key to saving the sport, really.
I think there is, but I think that the creativity and the change of the model that we've recently, or we're sort of used to seeing, could actually be thrown well and truly out of the window.
Yes.
What I find interesting in terms of all this is the fact that another sport that I follow quite clearly is cricket. The West Indies are coming next week, or they're here, and the Test match starts next week. And yet that's a collection of players that have always had this umbrella of concern regarding payments. So their team has always had this, we want to pay the team, but we haven't got the money in West Indies cricket to actually keep this team as we want it. And that was the birth of things like freelance players. So we saw people like Gale and Kevin Peterson actually become more freelance and play for different clubs rather than being tied to the actual national team or a county. They actually said, no, we want to be independent from all this. And so just throwing in a different line of thought, are we going to see players become independent and not tied, as we have done, to specific clubs, but they actually say, I will play for you this week if you pay me X? And actually see people moving around much faster than we've ever seen before. Now, I'm throwing that out. It's never been done before. But as a strategist, these are the things that we start thinking about. What's the next wave? What's possible? What's to stop that?
It could very much be a brave new world, couldn't it? We are yet to see exactly how clubs will adapt going forward, how the market will change. You talked about the concept of a buyer's market. Absolutely. The notions of big ticket transfer items probably long gone now. We could see many loans, swaps, or indeed the haves going into the have-nots for say their star players and paying lesser premium than they would because the cash is required. There are many different things that are going to adapt in this new way of working. Now, it'd be amiss of me not to mention a quite emerging area of the sporting market, which could tie into the current situation quite nicely. And this one probably comes back to you, Shana. Esports, which is obviously a massively growing area of commercial operations for many clubs. And given the pandemic and the lack of match day action, obviously esports, given its virtual nature, very much, you would hope, immune to the pandemic in that respect in terms of that physical attendance and its ability to generate fan engagement, even potentially revenues, depending on how far the resources are pushed into it. So question for you guys is, do you think the current lack of football crowds has renewed clubs' focus on that particular area as a revenue generation, fan engagement tool that they might look towards to replenish some of the otherwise depleted cash reserves that we previously talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of start that off, I saw a little article this morning, and to give you an idea, I know for my finance colleagues, they'll appreciate this. But in 2014, esports was worth an estimated $194 million. 2019, it jumped up to $980 million. And 2023, they're predicting $1.8 billion esports will be worth. Now, these stats came out before the pandemic hit. So actually, I personally predict that it's going to almost double. That's my prediction personally, because we know that people are going to be a lot more at home. There's also the danger that everyone's talking about a second wave of coronavirus coming and the possibility of us being put back into lockdown. Hence, even more of a reason why the sports brands should be capitalizing on esports. And we can see that a lot of them have been doing that. I know Ian's quite a passionate cricket supporter. So we see that actually it's not just football that are going down this avenue. Formula One the other day did a virtual Grand Prix and they pulled in 3.2 million viewers on that day. which is just, it's astounding figures. I think what we also need to really remember, and this is a personal passion of mine in terms of research, is the Generation Z market. How do football clubs target the younger generations? And actually, if you look at the stats now on that younger generation, more than 2/3 of under 35-year-olds are either playing or either watching esports. So why wouldn't you want to capitalize on such a good market? So I think esports is a really exciting avenue that a lot of sports brands, especially sports brands that are quite scared of it, to start looking into it. And the best way to do it is, I'll be quite biased, use our UCFB students, but look at your younger demographic and see what they want. See that they want to be looking at esports. I think one example I can give here of a League Two club that have done an amazing job on this is Stevenage Football Club. So last year, Burger King, which we all know Burger King, decided to actually become Stevenage's main sponsor. Now, this was never heard of before, such a major global brand tackling a League Two club. And their actual positioning on this, when I was reading the article the other day, they were saying that they wanted to turn the smallest team in the world into the largest team in the world on esports platform. And what they did is they found that people were actually following Stevenage purely because they liked the kit. So they could actually take their favorite players on FIFA that didn't play for Stevenage, but put them in a Stevenage kit, and Burger King went and planted their sponsor onto the shirt. So again, Ian was saying earlier about maybe we should consider international funds actually coming in and supporting a lot of these football clubs. And what better way to do it? The sponsors are out there, the media are out there, the broadcasters are out there. There is money out there. All we need to do now is connect the two and make sure that those opportunities capitalize. And just one last quick point, because I had to have a little go, because I'm the only South African on this panel. So we had to have one Rugby World Cup champion panelist on today. So I know just that one's for Ian.
Thanks for that one. That seemed a bit like a hospital pass, if we go back to the rugby analogy. I think one of the things is going back, and as you know, I love analogies, but going back to the tin can, I suppose what we're saying is who learns how to kick the tin can the best, who actually learns how to play and control that tin can, and what passes are we actually making with the tin can to who and when. So the whole esports, as the old guy that I am, always cringes with things like esports, due to the fact that I don't understand how people can be walking around in tracksuits and see that they are an esports specialist. I remember meeting the person at Manchester City who had just been employed as their professional esports person, walking around in a Man City tracksuit with his brand new trainers, with his agent, and then nearly keeling over when I realised how much money this guy was on. But
yeah, we
do have to look at these options. We can't take the approach or the ostrich approach as putting their head in the sand. These things are out there. One of the things that we've been saying to students for a while, and again to the horrification of the parents who are sat there, is this is a new emerging market. We can't avoid it. We shouldn't avoid it. We should actually embrace it. And one of the things that's being said is the next time that the Olympics goes to America, the competition is going to be held next door to Silicon Valley. And because you can actually have guest sports, they reckon that is when it's going to be launched. It's Los Angeles. They're going to launch esports, is where the talk is at the moment, into the Olympics. Well, that may come as horrification news or, wow, how can you change the Olympics from sport? But if you go back to the first Olympics, poetry was in it because it was the thing at the time and it was what people did and what people engaged in. So we've got to realize in many ways, and as you mentioned, a new generation is coming through, that whatever happens within football and sport is that it has to take these conditions, it has to embrace the future, and in many ways has to take the risks that come with it, but make those risks into real positives and opportunities. I think that's the exciting thing. We're seeing big changes in the pestle. We want to throw in something else for students that are watching. But if you look at the pestle environment, we've always gone to the traditional things. But what we need to look at from a business point of view is what is coming into that pestle, not what's there now, but what's actually coming into it that's going to create these changes, going to create this disturbance in the business world, and therefore who's going to run with it? Because if we don't run with it, all that happens is we get left naturally behind. And I think that's what we have to do. We've got to embrace it as exciting times. However, excitement comes with fear, but also the fact that we talk about the corona and the coronavirus coming through. I was listening to the news this morning. There's actually a potential other virus coming, which is being leaked not through pigs and things like that, or the bats, but this is through cows. So there's lots of things out there that doesn't take an awful lot for it to be another one, which may even be bigger than this one. And I suppose, although nobody's ever seen it before, we've put a precedence in place in terms of, yes, we go into lockdown when something like this emerges. So is this the first of a few situations that we're going to be faced with? Not just the first to get to the end of.
Yeah, let's hope it's standalone, Ian. But no, I entirely agree again. Now, I'm conscious of time, guys. It flies when you're talking about stuff you're interested in. I'm sure we could talk for another hour or so. I'm probably just going to look for some closing comments now from all of us. And I think I've kind of got an idea of what I'd like to ask each of you in turn. I'll probably start with Shana, if that's all right. Just off the back of what we just talked about over the last hour or so, we said that it could be an opportunity for a financial reset. My question to you is probably, is this a time where we're going to see almost a marketing reset as well? That being a combination of Generation Z, which is a whole new generation to market to, the pandemic and what that's led us to in terms of the approach to fan engagement, monetizing younger esports generation as well. Across those themes, are there any particular comments you'd like to close with in terms of that concept of a marketing reset alongside the financial reset we talked about?
Yeah, I mean, once again, we're going to repeat, I really feel this is an exciting time for marketers. I know many of them are worried. When I chatted to one of our students last week who's actually got an internship at Wycombe Wanderers, he said that being sort of a smaller club, they all pitched in ideas of how can we still engage with our fans? And I think that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a team effort from everyone, not just within the club, but from the whole totality of the football arena, sharing resources, sharing ideas. At the end of the day, the fans aren't going anywhere. You're not going to lose the fans. That's the beauty of football, is that fans are loyal. If you look at something like washing powder, I'm not necessarily loyal to a particular washing powder brand. But with football, we know that they're loyal. They want to still support their clubs. They want to still be part of the club. So sort of my closing comment would be, engage your fans, make them part of this time with you, make them even come up with ideas of how we could bring in extra cash into the club. They want to feel part of the club. They want to feel part, like they still making sure that that club will be around for generations to come. So just a lot of teamwork, and just try and involve them, and also just try and come up with really, really original content. And I think my final comment in everything, not just what's going on now, is be real. Fans can spot the brands that are not being real versus those ones that are. Be kind, be real, and you will keep your fans, and you will make sure that that club will last.
Thank you, Shana. Some very genuine advice there. Appreciate it. Hazel and Ian, I'm looking for some closing comments from yourselves, probably jointly, given finance and strategy do go a bit hand in hand. I have had a question from Mario Zambas asking, despite all of the advice, do the panel think that EFL and lower league clubs could go out of business. Now, I'm not going to ask you to answer that question concretely because I appreciate it's obviously a very sensitive matter. But in the context of providing some closing remarks on what you think clubs, especially in the lower level, should be looking at going forward in terms of advice, if you wish to address that question alongside that, please do. But otherwise, starting with Hazel, what would your key advice be to clubs over the coming weeks and months?
My main piece of advice, I think on sort of making sure that financially sustainable going on in the future, it is now's the time to have a rethink about the whole cost structure, about being creative with the assets you have. Looking at how you can get income streams in that you might not have thought about. How do you use the stadium? Is it empty except for the days you play? Could that become more of a community resource? I mean, I know up at Barnet, they've got a Starbucks in there, and they have a gym, and they've got a shop, and they try and involve it a lot more in the community. So quite a lot of clubs have got land, they've got space. Could it be used? A lot of schools are wanting extra space probably in September. So could they have classes come in? The local authority use some of their spaces, some of the space within the stadium during the week. So it's looking and saying, this is what I've got, this is what I own, how can I use it? How can I be creative? And I think it goes back to what I was saying before about communicating with the people you do business with, about looking at your capital structure, looking at your cash flow, credit management, and above all, being creative. And I think it's about acting. To be honest, it's about acting early. Do not let things roll so it gets so bad that in the end there's no alternative. And also because one thing that the industry needs to be aware of, because so many clubs owe each other money for loans and transfers and things like that, there's a danger if one person says, right, I'm going to sue you because I need the money, because they're cash strapped, we could get a little bit of a domino effect going around the industry if everyone starts being aggressive with collecting their debts in from other football, football debtors and creditors. So I think that would be, some of the things to think about from my perspective.
Thank you, Hazel. Ian?
Yeah, I agree with all that's been said. I think it's always makes me smile, and I've been shouting for ages when you hear accountants say be creative. I think we've been wanting accountants to be creative for quite a while, and it's great that they're realising that now is the time that they need to be. No, joking apart, I think that one of the things is, and we've seen the fact that the clubs need to work together. If you take Bradford City as an example, other clubs smile because Bradford City's got such a big fan base for League Two that when we actually go to away games, we're taking something like 2,000 fans. So if it was to be going back to the norm, then clearly the fans that belong to a club go to away games and the away clubs benefit from the finance coming in that way. But we do need to start thinking about what is the future. Don't worry about change, embrace change, and make sure that the change happens as a cohesive unit. I've been asked to throw in some sort of models that's going to help students that are watching this type of idea. But the ones that always come to mind with things like this is the Mackenzie 7S's, the Johnson and Scholes Cultural Web. But the thing that people miss is you've got to move it all together, and that's why the lines are joining each other. But also, one of the concerns I've always had is a lot of these models are seen as two-dimensional because we look at them on a piece of paper. What we actually need to realise is that in reality, they are three-dimensional. And all these elements have got roots. So what we have to do is not rip them out, but carefully replant them so that they're all moving forward in the right direction. We don't want to throw the stories, the symbols and things out of the window. We want to take everything with us and see that a new start, a new dawn can be exciting, but we don't have to throw everything out as we do it. We need to take as much as we can with us to show that we are still the club, but we are a club in a new dawn, a new exciting horizon, and in many ways a new vision. So that's what I see. Going back to the question, it was an interesting question in terms of will clubs go out of business? What I would say is, first of all, define the business. If you can actually define the business, yes, they may well go out of a business, but may well be the best in a new business. So we've got to really think about what do we mean by clubs going out of business. I think the clubs and the societies in which they are formed are always going to be there. As the society and the environment around it change, if the club refuses to change and will not move, then it will not be in business in the business it sees. But it's big potential to be the better club in a different business with a different future.
Thank you all. Really, really appreciate your insight today, and I'm sure our viewers do as well. From listening to you guys for the last hour or so, I think it's quite clear that 3 C's seem to come to mind of communication, collaboration, and creativity in terms of how clubs, especially at the lower levels, are going to adapt to this post-pandemic environment. Now, from my own kind of perspective, in terms of a kind of financial analysis viewpoint, I would expect in the shorter term that the forthcoming transfer market, as we've discussed, is going to become a buyer's market, where the larger haves can go to the have-nots for talent at less of a premium, or will it be dominated by loans and swaps? I also expect maybe a further level of owner contributions. I'm sure some of you might agree that might be required to help clubs through the short term where possible. But given obviously that that's going to tie into the financial regulations in playing leagues, you would expect certain allowances have to be made, similar to what UEFA have done recently with their own financial fair play rules for the clubs on the European stage. In the longer term, obviously certain notions have been discussed from the perspective of, is the gap between the Premier League and the rest too big? Should there be some kind of redefinition of that revenue distribution in terms of parachutes and solidarity payments down the footballing pyramid? Obviously, it will take a lot of time to discuss, opinionate, and come to some kind of solution on if that were to pass. But obviously, a very interesting notion has been discussed in the media at present. And then finally, as Peter Dawson mentioned on the question, very much a case of I would expect an absolute salary cap, if not relative, that's to revenues and sales on a percentage basis, to potentially come into play in the English Football League, just to kind of use this moment as that financial reset to put a sustainability measure in place beyond the existing profitability, sustainability rules, salary cost management notions that we see across the EFL. But overarchingly, as we've talked about for the last hour, that enhanced commercial and business development focus is going to be crucial across the board, looking beyond those traditional revenue streams. Thank you for your time today, to my panel, to everyone else that's watching now or recording later on. I hope you've enjoyed, and we look forward to having you along again in the future. Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Stay safe.